recorded history to those that exist now, much as they did centuries ago. New Mexico's people have held to this land, to the spirits of its past.
New Mexico is one of those subtle sort of places, I think, which gradually affects the people who come here. People do not affect this place. This place affects the people.
It's amazing that a place so powerful and special still reflects so much of the human presence. And it is that human presence with distinct Indian and Spanish and Anglo cultures that makes New Mexico so different, southwestern, and so much a part of our portrait of America.
Here comes Michael.
Mankind on this continent was found in New Mexico. What drew those early bands of hunters? Food? A climate less harsh? And more than 10,000 years later, the Spanish conquerors moved north up the Rio Grande River, lured by the legends of the 7 cities of gold. There were no cities of gold. Just the descendants of those early hunters, now living in pueblos, villages carved into the sheer rock walls of the canyons that lead down into the Rio Grande Valley. Then came the Anglos, Americans moving west, first the mountain men, then the ranchers and miners. And in this century, artists and writers who find inspiration here. And now, the scientists in search of the unknown. What is it that draws people to this place they call the land of enchantment? Even after more than 100 years, you can still see the ruts of the pioneers' wagon wheels made on the Santa Fe Trail, a tribute to their odyssey in the dryness which preserves their footprints, it seems, forever. These travelers, like all pioneers, were drawn by notions of space, freedom, and opportunity. This broad New Mexican landscape provided ample space and freedom, but opportunity was found like the cottonwood trees near water. The scarcity of water throughout much of the state has determined where most people have settled. Albuquerque, the largest city in New Mexico. There is water here and therefore opportunity, much of it based on government-financed research and development. In this dry state, underground deposits of water give Albuquerque the potential to mushroom. Already 1/3 of the state's people live here. It's a regional center, the crossroads of the state. But for the hot air balloonists waiting to rise into the gentle morning breeze, it's a world center, the capital of this sport. Over 400 of these fanciful airships are here for the International Balloon Fiesta. Albuquerque, a city moving into the future, sits in a state still close to its past. When the first Spanish explorers arrived nearly 400 years ago, they made their capital Santa Fe, 60 miles north of Albuquerque, and it's still the capital. Pueblo Indians sell jewelry and crafts beneath the portals of the Palace of Governors, the oldest continuously used public building in the United States. And it was from here that statehood was proclaimed in 1912. Santa Fe, not only the state capital, but the capital of southwestern art as well. Indian, Spanish, and Anglo art is found in the multitude of Santa Fe galleries, more galleries than any city of its size in the world. Santa Fe celebrates its annual fiesta by burning the town's worries, along with Zozobra, a towering paper marionette, also known as Old Man Gloom, a mythological character created by one of the many artists who came from the East after World War I. These early bohemians formed a lively art colony which drew on the rich tapestry of native culture and created a spirit of artistic freedom, still very much alive today. To live in Santa Fe, you must often bring your own work with you, like political cartoonist Bill Malden, a two-time Pulitzer Prize winner. Malden was born and raised in the southern New Mexico hills. He left the state as a young man, but was drawn back. In 1970, Bill Malden returned to New Mexico and settled down in Santa Fe.
Santa Fe has always been a lovely place to live, and everybody who's been here knows it. But what's kept it from exploding, so like, say, Albuquerque has. Now, when I was a kid in New Mexico, Albuquerque had 40,000 people. Santa Fe had 30,000. Now Albuquerque has 500,000, and until about 10 years ago, Santa Fe would have been hard-pressed to find more than 40,000 people here, you see. So in other words, Santa Fe had not grown. The reason is that there's not enough water to support any industry, and therefore there are no jobs. And that's been the main reason. For example, I'm sitting in the middle of a patch of Kentucky bluegrass right here, which I'm going to have to let die because I won't be able to afford the water bills much longer to keep it up, which is not a bad thing. I mean, in other words, I don't think this bluegrass should have been put here in the first place. It happened to be here when I bought the house, and so I've been keeping it up. But this is not grass country, and it's not shade tree country. This is pinon and juniper country. People come here, I think, and try to impose themselves on the country or the landscape, and I think what happens is they either change themselves or they go back, leave. A lot of people come here and then go away again. It's one of the reasons that I always loved it, really, even as a kid, I think, is the fact that it's the kind of landscape that puts you in your place but doesn't intimidate you.
Our very first experience in coming to Santa Fe, I'd heard about Santa Fe all my life. I knew a number of the painters who had first come out here, and
Lawrence Sisson painted the coast of Maine for 20 years. Then he came to Santa Fe for a visit and became a part of a very different landscape, one that holds him still.
The very first time when we first arrived in Santa Fe, we stopped by the roadside in Nambay and found the most extraordinary view of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, with the snow and the peaks, the lilacs over the adobe walls. The light was bathed on the landscape like I had never seen except maybe in Brazil or down near the equator. It was almost a divine experience when I arrived here and saw that incredible colors of the purples, greens, blues, reds, every color of the rainbow expressed in pure honesty in front of me. I thought to myself, this exceeds all of those dreams that an artist would have about finding a landscape that was almost utopian in terms of its presence of color. Nature provides that kind of museum tapestry. It's as if the canyons in the Southwest, and particularly the Navajo country, where the canyons appear to be museums with these marvelous tapestries hanging from the rims of the canyon in bandolier. And it's as if the Navajos lived in the warp between the torn threads of these great canyons. And the long shadows created by the incredible light of the New Mexico sun. I'm always fascinated at the thought that perhaps yesterday's rain somehow changed forever the shape of one mesa that seems to have been there for millions of years. that we're suddenly seeing history every time a great storm passes through, that the forms I painted yesterday are no longer the same.
When the English novelist D.H. Lawrence journeyed to New Mexico in the 1920s, he wrote to a friend, "This is a high tableland desert country, 6,000 feet up, with high mountains nearby. America is more or less as I expected, shove or be shoved. But still it has a bigness, a sense of space, and a certain sense of rough freedom, which I like." Like the Spanish before him, Lawrence followed the Rio Grande north and settled in the Taos Valley, nestled between the spectacular Rio Grande Gorge and the mysterious Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Spanish culture has adapted to this land. A spirit has evolved over centuries in the Spanish community, a way of living with love for the land, sharing the water, and knowing your neighbor. This land and way of living draws many to Taos today, but in that attraction lies a danger, a risk of losing what drew us in the beginning. Writer John Nichols came here in 1969. He bought a small piece of land with the profits from his bestseller, The Sterile Cuckoo.
For me, like Taos was kind of like infinity in a grain of sand, right? It was a real small place that to me has universal implications. Also, I was real drawn here by the land and territory. I mean, I wanted to get to a place where I could look at birds again, where I could go fishing if I wanted to. I didn't know much about fishing when I got out here. I remember once I was down in the Pueblo River after a wood run, and all of a sudden these two geezers came up the river, and they were going whippity, 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 whippity with this fly line, and they really were good, you know, just flicking these little flies into the various holes in the river. And one of these guys had like about a 14-inch brown trout stuck in his front shirt pocket with this big tail flopped over like that, you know. I just took a look at this guy, watched him fish right up through us. And like I think the next day I went out and I got a fly rod. You know, I says, I like that, I'm going to do that.
In New Mexico, water is indeed life. Scarce water is diverted to thirsty fields through a system of man-made irrigation ditches, acequias they're called, built by hand over 200 years ago, maintained by hand as long as there are people who care. John Nichols views the health of this fragile system as a barometer of the health of the Spanish culture which created it. Today, many new people come to Taos, not always aware of the importance of these thin veins of water running through the community. But as John writes in his book, The Last Beautiful Days of Autumn, there are still some land-based old-timers, their children, and a few concerned newcomers struggling to keep the more important traditions intact. These folks have a respect for community, a respect for each other, a compassion for all living things, a sense of humor, and a pride in themselves coupled with a humility that comes from instinctively understanding their places on earth. Nichols continues, one such person is my longtime friend Andreas Martinez.
Look at that hole. It used to be about 3 inches longer than that. This used to be my grandfather's hole, Jose Lino Aragon. It's an old-timer. You can't find anything like this today, you know, and it must be around 150 years old. And this
Listen to what John went on to write about his 85-year-old friend Andreas. Most deeply, Andreas believes in the land. He has worked hard to protect it and to preserve sensibilities that venerate it. The basis upon which his life and vitality is founded is the understanding that when you kill the land, you destroy the human soul.
we want to live from the ground, from the earth. We consider the earth over here as our mother, and we must maintain it clean and preserve it clean. Our waters run in the ditches over here, which I love, and everybody loves over here. When these ditches are dry, everybody in the community over here feels discouraged, because they can't see the water running in the ditches. And every spring, the mayordomos and the commissions summon the people at certain day or days to clean this ditch over here, It gets full of rubbish,
Each year, new people come to town. They're largely middle-class people like myself. And they buy property along the ditch. They become parciantes on the irrigation system. But they're not really interested. They don't have animals. They're not really interested in irrigating their fields. A lot of them don't grow gardens, so they're not interested in having the water for that. Some of the people sell their water rights because, coming to town, you need a bundle, let's say, to start building a house. You want to build a new house. You can get a lot of money for your irrigation rights. You can get something like $10,000 for an acre of water rights. And so people do that. They retire the water on the ditch, and then they're not interested in working on the acequia anymore. They also have a real problem getting into the local culture. For example, most of the ditch meetings that I go to are held in Spanish, because that's basically the way people do business around here. And so a lot of the gabachos that come in, a lot of the Anglos like myself that come in, they feel a real lack of contact immediately because they don't learn Spanish. I think there ought to be a gate at the entrance to the valley where anybody who comes in is automatically required to learn Spanish.
When I used to climb up that mountain over there,
Andreas used to operate a small dairy on this land. The fields were lush and green then due to his hard work. But 15 years ago, faced with illness, Andreas sold this land.
lush like that, green. It was a beautiful sight to look. But now look here. These were very productive fields. I used to raise 600 bales from this one field to the next road. But you can see the difference now.
The difference is that people now live on the land and not from it, as Andreas once did. This land, now so dry and barren, has been subdivided and resold to a new generation, many refugees from the cities.
People that were used to live in the city, used to live in the city. And they're tired. I don't blame him. I wouldn't live in the city if you paid me. I don't blame him for coming over here. This is a beautiful country. But I think that they should take care of the land. Build their houses, yes, but not spoil it.
All right, Holly, let's go. All right.
Bob Gomez shares the spirit of Andreas Martinez, a spirit that will preserve a way of life in New Mexico. Like Andreas, Bob was born in the Taos Valley, left to see the rest of the country, and then returned to Star's small dairy. He now provides milk for his neighbors and friends, and has hopes of soon becoming a certified dairy.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Bob Gomez, like Andreas Martinez,
You got to.
is dedicated to keeping the Taos Valley a productive agricultural area, a place to raise a family and build a
We
life.
have that hose. I mean, the water is one of the biggest, because the town is growing, and of course the town needs water to grow, and we're in constant battle with your developers in this area, definitely. But to be frank with you, what I foresee, now this is my own personal opinion, but what I foresee, farming is going to be of the past here in this area. I can see it. I mean, I was born and raised here. I recall when I would walk from home to school, and you would find, I could count the houses between here and Ranchos, about a couple miles down the road. Now, what used to be farming is not farming anymore, simply because the daddy gave a little portion of land to his son, and they divided it, and they just keep on building on it. What used to be real good prime farming is no longer anymore. So slowly we're losing our water rights, slowly we're losing all that kind of stuff, and I foresee that because of the town is growing, that eventually all this will be of the past. And how many years, I really don't know, how long we can fight it. What we will lose, gee, I don't know, it's the closeness with each other. I think it's going to be become just like another city eventually.
People continue to move to Taos as they have for centuries. But if they take care to understand the land and preserve the culture which attracted them, this valley may not have to become just another city.
I'm not a farmer, man. I'm a writer. I'm an intellectual, right? I mean, I like to go sit in a local cafe and talk about James Joyce, man. That's fun. I earn my money in Los Angeles and New York City, and I don't have pretensions to being, a humble man of the earth. Nevertheless, a lot of what attracts me to this area is, a certain land-based culture and attitude. I mean, that's real important in my life, to have that in my life, and to have neighbors around me who are involved in that, involved in animals, involved in taking care of the land, etc. So I make an effort, even though I have no animals, to take care of my fields, what little fields I've got. I work on it, I irrigate, I pay my dues, I work on the ditches, and I let my neighbor take my hay, because I have no use for it, I don't charge him for it. But to me, it's real important. That helps my neighbor, because he's got a few cows.
I was blessed to be here in this part of the country. And it just goes to show, a lot of people think that they can make a living here in New Mexico. I'm out to prove that you can, if you make up your mind to do it. And it takes determination. It's not easy, I guarantee you that. It takes a lot of hard work and determination, really, to get out there, because you meet up with a lot of the negative out there, for sure. But it's worth every bit of it.
Our valley is worth a lot of respect and a lot of... I respect this land over here, and I love it. I still love it, even if it isn't mine. Bueno.
Spanish colonists pushed in the southwest, and for a while they prospered. Their trade routes stretched from Santa Fe to the Philippines and back to Spain. It took as long as 3 years to ship goods from one end of that route to the other. And then Spanish power declined, and those settlers and traders in New Mexico were left behind, nearly forgotten in the mountains, living museums of the 17th century. The present is filled with the past in New Mexico. Pilgrims have journeyed to the village of Chimayo for more than a century, drawn by the legendary healing powers of the earth beneath the Santuario de Chimayo. And by a miracle, 3 times, the legend goes, the crucifix behind the altar was taken away. Each time the crucifix miraculously reappeared in the Santuario. The faithful took it as a sign that heaven meant the relic and its power to remain here in Chimayo.
The pilgrimage has not brought the faith to New Mexico, but has reaffirmed the faith that has been here for hundreds of years.
Along with their Catholic faith, Spanish settlers brought the art of weaving to Chimayo. And David Ortega's family has been passing on the craft from father to son for 7 generations.
This blanket was made by my father. He was 89 years old when he made these. He was a weaver for over 70 years. Well, this particular valley is very self-sufficient. Since we have water, and you can grow almost anything here. If people have any acreage at all, they can make a livelihood. And, well, people have their roots here. They just stick around, They don't sell the land. The people, like the fathers and the mothers, they hold their lands for their sons or grandchildren. Even though they don't live here, they expect them to get back someday.
David Ortega himself is one of the reasons why people are able to make a livelihood and preserve the traditions of this valley. David is the proprietor of a true cottage industry. His weaving business supplies looms and material for over 100 weavers who work in their homes in the surrounding area. David is also caretaker of the Ortega Ditch. He preserves the flow of water and the right to use it. But it's not always easy coaxing a 200-year-old acequia through the 20th century.
Our ditch is a very troublesome ditch. It's one of the oldest, but it comes to very rugged beginnings. Yeah, this is what you call a callejon, a little alley. And you see the water comes to irrigate. Somebody irrigated here already. See, it separates the two houses. The ditch comes between the two houses to irrigate inside of the plaza. This is the square, the plaza. Everything was contained here. This was the original settlement. And it was like a fort. They would enclose themselves in here, protect themselves from raids from Indians, and they were safe. Chimayo is considered one of 12 villages in this country that is old, that has never grown, but it has never died.
The town of Lincoln also refuses to die. Another living museum like Chimayo, but here the spirit comes from Texas rather than Spain. Once the center of the largest county in the state, now Lincoln is home to 60-some-odd residents dedicated to keeping alive the spirit of the early Anglo settlers. Each year they gather with history buffs from around the state to celebrate old Lincoln days. New Mexico became a territory of the United States in 1848. And after the Civil War, farmers moved into these southern New Mexico hills from as far away as Appalachia. Cattlemen began to move in with their herds from Texas. The arrival of these new settlers caused conflict. Feuds erupted into full-blown range wars. The bloodiest was the Lincoln County War, during which local hero Billy the Kid made his last escape.
Well, he's a kind of a favorite son, what he is. By and large, I think people overlook whatever faults he had and see the best side of him. And he's pretty much a hero in the county here for most of the old folks. And people feel that he wasn't really an outlaw. He was only one of the fighters in the feud. The name Lincoln County War is not just a byword, because President Hayes called it a war so that he wouldn't have to prosecute so many for murder.
Mountain men came from the north and cleared the way for the Anglo settlers to follow.
The role the mountain men played in New Mexico history is the fact that they are the ones who encouraged people to come westward and look at this country. They were the explorers. They were the people who had visions in their mind. But they were also the free spirit type people that they didn't want a lot of people around them either.
You don't have to go very far back in history. I mean, you reach some pretty remarkable characters. The past is very close in New Mexico.
The future is also very present in New Mexico. These recreated characters were the predecessors for a later wave of Anglo immigrants, a continuing wave. Los Alamos, the atomic city, was little more than a crossroads in 1943 when hundreds of the nation's most brilliant scientists gathered here to be part of a top-secret mission. Project Director J. Robert Oppenheimer chose this lonely mesa to keep the project far removed from the eyes of strangers. It worked. Oppenheimer's team successfully built and tested the atomic bombs that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. When Oppenheimer finished, he was replaced as laboratory director by Norris Bradbury.
Once the atomic bomb had been detonated, down at Trinidad, down near Alamogordo. And once it was known to everybody in the world by the shots in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it was now known across the entire scientific and technical world that there was no basic natural obstacle to make a nuclear explosion. Up to that time, one might have thought there was something that nature would hold out and say no, that you couldn't get a real energy-producing explosion. But it now turned out you could.
July 16th, 1945, at 5:29 a.m., the nuclear race began.
I guess I was simply sure that the United States monopoly of nuclear weapons would last a few years. Actually, it lasted just a little more than 2 when the Russians got their bomb. It's a long story from that time on. We had to, first of all, greatly improve atomic bombs. You've seen what some of the earliest bombs looked like, and you can look around and see what some of the newer bombs look like. There's a fantastic difference.
While the scientists of Los Alamos National Laboratory see their work as a deterrent to war, others view this technology in a far different way. Tony Price builds his futuristic sculptures from metal parts discarded by Los Alamos, fragments of nuclear weapons vastly more powerful than those dropped on Japan, cast-offs from the nation's nuclear arsenal that Price transforms in his Santa Fe studio.
It was always kind of spooky going up to Los Alamos, the birthplace of the nuclear age, to get these things. They always had a kind of spirit of death hanging over the parts, and you never knew exactly what part did what. And it wasn't until 10, 12 years later I began to have the feeling of the horror of this, and maybe there would be a way to express with these parts a message about the horror of nuclear war. This is a interesting one. This piece is titled Small Town Planet Cracker. It was first built in Espanola, New Mexico. And these different masks are some from the area of New Mexico. Like here's a Hopi mud head and a little Kachina head. And several of these down at the bottom here are all made out of the nuclear parts too, and they're samurai spirits from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And here is a piece, it's an owl called Nuclear Wisdom.
The Trinity site, where the world's first atomic bomb was exploded, is now in the middle of the Army's huge White Sands missile range. White Sands sprawls across 4,000 square miles of southern New Mexico. During World War II, the missile range was the cradle of American rocketry. Just after the war, captured German rockets were tested here. Today, the missile range is the site of hundreds of military and scientific rocket launches every year. Horses, cattle, and even African antelope share the wide open spaces with rocket recovery teams. Much of White Sands was carved from privately owned ranch land taken by the government after World War II. The Army built its headquarters and main launch complex on the Cox Ranch, once a 90,000-acre spread at the base of the Organ Mountains.
The original people here were the Indians, as far as we know, and they lived here because there was water. And he who controls the water controls the surrounding area. The Spanish came in at a later date in the late 1500s.
Rob Cox still lives in the thick-walled adobe ranch house he inherited from his father.
As some of the historians tell me, the Spaniards made slaves out of the Indians. In the early 1800s, this house was built, and the people that owned it controlled the water. They built up a ranching enterprise. that my granddad bought out in 1893.
After the Second World War, there was a desperate need for open land to test rockets. Almost every ranch family on this range had a father or a son who fought in the war. And with a spirit of patriotism, many gave up their land for the defense of the nation. Those ranchers that were allowed to keep their land on the edge of the missile range still must evacuate periodically, a government-paid trip to town.
Hi, Tom.
How are you today?
Good. We get to go to town,
Get
right?
to go to town.
Good.
I got a
That's-
pen, it'll write.
We need a vacation. When is this, Tom?
Friday night.
Tom Daybury used to ride this range. Now he drives it for the Army. He covers hundreds of miles around White Sands to notify families of the next shot. Rocketry is a precise business, but better safe than sorry.
It looks to me like it boils down to being kind of like Kennedy said, President Kennedy said, about what you can do for your country, not what your country does for you. And I don't know. We all have to make a contribution and a sacrifice. And it's been done throughout history, and I think we'll continue.
Roger, what's the roadblock situation on the Black Brant? Have you heard from NORAD yet? All righty.
Some nights, it's a test of the latest guided missile capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. Tonight, it's Black Brant, a sounding rocket poised to take a high-altitude peek at the stars.
They call it a sounding rocket instead of a missile because it's unguided. If it was guided, then we would say it was a missile. This case here is strictly unguided. It's in the hands of God when it leaves that tower out there tonight.
Affirmative, the fix area on the north. How are we doing up there? Any problems?
Okay, put the rectifier in. Okay, return the tower.
Roger, computer, do we know for sure that that's good RAYOB data?
Mark, T-minus 60 seconds and running on Operation Golf Bravo. 5-5.
We're looking for the spectrum of a hot white dwarf star
5-0.
whose name is HZ43.
4-5.
The unique part about this range here is the recovery aspect of the range. Actually, in the past, we've had to launch rockets and many things maybe have gone wrong, and that's where we learned is by being able to go back up on the range and recover the debris, and then we're able to put the pieces back together and tell you exactly what went wrong with it.
19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
A 1,000 years ago, about the time William the Conqueror was invading England, a remarkable civilization flourished here in Chaco Canyon. Dozens of major pueblos housed thousands of people. These ancient ones, or Anasasis as the Navajos now call them, lived by harnessing scarce rainfall to irrigate their crops in the desert. A sophisticated civilization emerged. But just as the system was reaching its peak, it suddenly and mysteriously failed. The Anasasis abandoned Chaco Canyon. Why they left, no one knows for sure. But their fragile way of life may have been unable to adapt to changing climate and shortages of fuel. Little did the Anasasis know that they were living atop some of the richest reserves of coal, oil, and uranium in the world. The Bisti field just north of Chaco Canyon is already being strip mined. Further north, huge electric power generating plants operate right on the edge of the coal fields that feed them. A similar plant and strip mine and even a small town to house plant workers are proposed for the edge of Chaco Canyon, not far from the ancient Anasazi ruins at Pueblo Pintado. In the shadow of the ancient ruins lies the modern community of Pueblo Pintado. Navajos from miles around gather here to talk about community business. Lately, most of that talk has been about strip mining and the changes it will bring.
She says we're living right in the middle of a proposed mining area and also the proposed railroad right-of-way. My family is very much religious, and my mother is a medicine woman, and we have a big heart for our land, which is our Mother Earth. We have a very much concern of what they were going to do.
Frank Chihuelito is part of the Navajo Tribal Council.
It's going to be a tremendous change on the culture, and which means about 10, 20 years from now, our culture is going to become practically completely ruined, because the people that move in is not going to be practicing the same culture. Very few people will respect the culture we have here.
Many of the Navajo families, the majority of them, still cling to their traditional Navajo beliefs.
Leonard Sosi, a Navajo lawyer, represents many of the Indian people who would be displaced by the strip mines planned for this area.
If you go look down there, that was a place where the family that lives here had a 3-day ceremony done. And during these 3 days, a lot of traditional blessings, sacred blessings, and also blessings of traditional objects were made. A lot of sacred objects were made. And these sacred objects were put on the hill back down that way. To this family that lives here now, that hill is now considered a sacred site. This family would not dare even attempt to try to destroy that hill. It's just not our way, it's just not the Navajo way, it's not the Indian way.
The Navajos of today's Pueblo Pintado may be spared strip mining because of their proximity to the ancient ruins. A 1,000 years ago, this land was home to a race of people who dotted the dusty landscape with majestic stone architecture and made the dry land bloom. What sort of people left these ruins, and why? National Park Service archaeologist Randall Morrison.
The ruins that you see here began in the early to middle 900s. The lack of metal defined the technology for architectural purposes. Given that limited technology, essentially a Stone Age toolkit, they created what you see here. Since they were a lithic people, a stone-using people, you might say that they probably knew as much about stone technology and as we know about metal technology, or at least as we knew in the 19th century. This kind of stone is best for this kind of stone is best for that. And then they would go to great lengths to procure those particular stones. 150 miles away for one kind of obsidian, 50 miles away for one kind of chert, certain kinds of cobbles out of formations 2 and 3 miles away. Each of those stones had a particular use in their toolkit. It appears that they left because they lacked the capability of carrying on. For whatever the initial cause was, when some people left, apparently, the whole system had to shut down, so everyone had to leave. That's the way it looks today.
In New Mexico, either you adapt to the land or you leave. Elaborate cultures spanning times twice the age of our republic have run their course within these dry canyons. The future will judge whether today's New Mexican culture will have more staying power than the Anasazis. In the desert canyons of New Mexico where there's no sound but the wind, listen. Is it just the wind? I'm Hal Holbrook. Join us again for Portrait of America.